Alas, for you who desire the day of the Lord, why do you want the day of the Lord? It is darkness, not light, as if someone fled from a lion and was met by a bear, or went into the house and rested a hand against the wall and was bitten by a snake. Is not the day of the Lord darkness, not light, and gloom with no brightness in it? I despise your festivals. I take no delight in your solemn assemblies. Even though you offer me your burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. And the offerings of well-being of your fatted animals, I will not look upon. Take away from me the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the melody of your hearts. But let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks to God.
Tough to hear. We continue our celebration and acknowledgement of Black History Month. And this week I want to talk about the great tradition of the Black prophetic voice in the church. But one of the powers of white supremacy is to imagine, though, that Black people are a singular block, that they agree on everything, that they all like the same movies and food and vote the same way, and that the Black church is a monolithic, unified whole. Whenever that happens, whenever someone is called in to give the Black perspective or to speak for the Black community, you can be assured that white supremacy is setting the agenda. And it's important for me to point that out because I am simply going to be talking about a portion and will not cover all of the nuances of what we talk about as the Black prophetic witness. It is not the history of the Black church, but a portion thereof. To talk about the Black church ignores the vast history of what does it mean. And so we only have time today to talk about that prophetic voice, and I think it is timely and necessary. So I will do my best to give some witness to that history. Now we know that it had been given a great deal of attention through the civil rights movement, but it had a much longer and wider history. And the simple fact is whenever it raised its voice throughout our history, that voice was never one that was accepted by the majority. People did not want to hear what was being said. We look back now and turn heroes of civil rights icons, but when they spoke, they were not welcome. Now, while some of you have made it very clear to me that you'd prefer I not ever quote Dr. Cornel West again, I need to do that this morning. And while there is much about him that I understand that folks do not want, I want to say this, that even truth can come from many places. And on the Black prophetic tradition in the church, I believe that he is on point. And so I want to share this extended quote from him. He says, "The Black prophetic tradition has been the leaven in the American democratic loaf. What has kept American democracy from going fascist or authoritarian or autocratic has been the legacy of Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, Martin King, Fannie Lou Hamer. This is not because Black people have a monopoly on truth, goodness, or beauty. It is because the Black freedom movement puts pressure on the American empire in the name of integrity, decency, honesty, and virtue." End quote. It is clear that there are these prophetic voices today. Some of you might be familiar with the Moral Monday movement, Dr. Barber and others who have stood up to say no when we have chosen to put people's lives on the line, to cut off basic needs that people need in order to save a few dollars here and there. The history of this country, though, is the story where white Christians have used the gospel of Jesus in ways that I do not believe the gospel was intended to be used. Now, I can say this because I went to a seminary that was part of the work of putting together what is often known as slave master theology. Columbia Seminary does acknowledge it, but out of their tradition, the spirituality of the church, Dr. Henry Thornwell and others came from that seminary. And it's only because they were able to examine those realities that we work to keep those realities from becoming reality again. And that is how we know that the gospel of Jesus was used by white Christians to enslave Africans and their descendants, and then to make them believe that it was ordained by God. And that nothing in this life should really be changed because God will take care of it after you die. What happens to us now doesn't really matter. But that is not the gospel of Jesus Christ. And the truth is, the gospel of Jesus Christ could not be manipulated forever. And much to the surprise of the white folks in power, a tradition began to grow out of those who had been brutally enslaved, who heard and read the stories of Moses and Daniel, Jesus, and the prophets, and they heard stories of freedom and liberation and transformation. And things began to change. In word and in song, images of judgment began to rise as they understood that it was not about someday, but soon and very soon, where the poor and the downtrodden will be lifted up, and those rich oppressors will be brought low. We proclaim that every year at Christmas in the Magnificat. It is power. And it changed. The gospel could not be contained in the midst of the oppression. This isn't just, though, I believe that black prophetic tradition isn't just in and for the black church. It is part of the American experience, and we need to listen. It's a voice we have to hear again and again, because at the end of the day, it is the only antidote to the great American myth of optimism and self-congratulation. Now I'm going to get in trouble. The black prophetic tradition is the voice of the prophet to the American empire that it does not want to hear. Not then, not now. But on some level, if we look back on our own history, we kind of live this lie, where we're innocent, that we're kind and decent people who always do the right thing. All the while, we're enacting violence upon others. That theme has been part of the American experience as we killed Native people and enslaved African people and then put God's seal of approval on it. Because we were the new chosen people, we could do no wrong. Pure and innocent white Europeans that we were. As we bombed countries into submission and killed children with drones, and call innocent civilians who are killed collateral damage as we move to the next commercial break. And we believe on some level that there's either nothing we can do about it, or that it's okay because God is on our side and we are good people. We read our Bibles, and we stand for national anthems, and we think somehow we're going to be great again. And that greatness always is this strange longing for this idyllic innocence where we were pure and white and nice and people knew their place. It is about trying to reclaim that great American myth. But that great American myth was a lie then, and it is a lie now. I know these things, for the Bible tells me so. But to speak about it is dangerous. It has cost prophets in all ages their lives. And that is why I have come to believe that the co-opting of the black prophetic tradition has been used to sell coke and Ram trucks. Because if you can co-opt it, you can take away its power. But just like the gospel of Jesus Christ, in which it is rooted, it cannot be held down forever. The black prophetic tradition is rooted in the prophets. And on Dr. King's grave in Atlanta are the words, "Let justice roll down like waters." And it is a reminder there that he and others were not the first prophets, and that they should not be the last until that day. And in many ways, I think that the people to whom Amos was speaking, we actually know this to be true, were a lot like those of us that get caught up in this American innocence myth. They were, in other words, our cousins. Because what we know of the people to whom Amos was speaking is that they loved God. They claimed to love God. They believed that they loved God. They put on great festivals. They obviously had a lot of money. They could put on these great festivals. And they looked forward to the day when God would make everything right. They longed for the day of the Lord, and the prophet warns, be careful what you ask for. They held solemn assemblies, gatherings that focused upon God. They did their ritual worship, and they gave their best in the offerings. And they spent money on songs and musicians and harps. They were good, religious folk who knew what going to worship was all about. These were people who knew the stories of faith and believed they were doing what God wanted them to do, and God says otherwise, and they don't want to hear it. Justice has been turned to wormwood. Apparently, what we do in worship and what we do in the marketplace actually are supposed to connect, says the Bible. That justice is not just for some or just for those who can afford it, but for everyone. And they decided that it was just going to be for them. It's clear if you see what's going on, those followers of God had put their trust in the military and in their alliances, that they could not be wiped out. And God says, yeah, right. They have made sure that the voice of dissent, those who've said this is wrong at the gate, were pushed into free speech zones. They've trampled on the poor by taking away their food stamps so we could give tax cuts to the wealthy. They then, and this is right there in the text, they instituted regressive taxes on food, the levies of grain, so that they could build houses of hewn stone, which apparently was news to them. They weren't going to get to live in them. And these very good religious folk attack the righteous and take bribes, and it doesn't seem to bother them when they go to worship. They push the poor away from the gate because apparently it makes comfortable people uncomfortable. Which there's some irony in here, and I want to point out, I have before. That place where Dr. King is buried, when I was in seminary, they passed an ordinance to make sure that no homeless people could get near it. Because it made the people who were there visiting uncomfortable, and no one noticed the irony. Actually, a few people did, and I give thanks for their witness. And they did all these things, believing that they were being faithful and worshiping God in the right way. These are not people that we can turn into some sort of caricature of evil who are looking to just tear up the world. These are people who thought they were doing good, and God says it is evil. It's evil. And they have to be shocked. They have to be uncomfortable. But don't you know? We worship you. Now, unfortunately, we know the rest of the story because the people who were listening to Amos didn't listen. They told him to go away. They trusted in their myth of goodness, in their myth of innocence. They trusted finally in their military and their economic schemes to stay in power. And in the end, their country was no more. An unjust society will not survive. And that is the... One of my professors, Walter Brueggemann, said that if you're a coward, hide behind the text. That's what I'm trying to do today. So far, the truth of the matter is, we haven't listened. Too often, when the voice of the prophets rise, we have called them outside agitators. We have worked outside the bounds to assassinate them, and then try to get their assassinators out of the country via Canada. We have worked to discredit them by any means necessary. We developed a whole group within the FBI to go after all of the black movements, the black power movement, and all of them. That's what we did with our FBI. By any means necessary to tear them down. The voices of the prophets we're not welcome. And that's why we're called to listen to the voices of our ancestors. If we don't want to listen to the prophetic voices of today and even recently in our past, in the last 50 years, we better listen to Amos. The good news is, all is not lost. In the face of the injustice, in the face of continued evil, in the face of ignoring the prophetic voices, the prophetic voice doesn't go away. It continues. And we too have a place in this. I don't always know what to tell you in terms of your specific actions, but there are steps that you can take. But the first one is to admit on the inside, in body, mind, and spirit, that we really could do more to be part of the work for justice. And that at the end of the day, we can never make peace with injustice. We must never allow ourselves in the process, which I believe is the sort of liberal Presbyterian way of doing it, which is we believe on some level it can't be done and we fall into despair. And that is not an option for us. We may not be part of the final work, but we are called not to stop nonetheless. Each of us can do something. And the good news is when we do something happens, because it keeps us from being co-opted. It keeps us from being chained. It keeps us from being torn down. And then we model for our children and our grandchildren and those who will come behind us to pick up the mantle. So it is my charge and challenge that we continue to be unsatisfied with the way things are. And let that lack of satisfaction with injustice lead us to keep moving until justice for all people rolls down like mighty waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream.